Welcome back to Shatter Our Souls with Novaria. Today, we are tackling most of the Highland region of The Legend of Zelda, not Highland, Dueling Peaks region of The Legend of Zelda, Breath of the Wild. Now, before we go there, there was a shrine about 2 videos ago that I was just not all there for, and I neglected to actually finish it because I was thinking bombs, not thinking stasis. And that's going to be a little bit of a potential problem I have. I have a tendency that if the first solution don't work, it probably doesn't. Good news though, we always have a chance to go back, look at the scenery, play the game a little bit more, and in general interact with the world of The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild far more often than I think a lot of other games out there would have you game out, relax, and enjoy. Now, I realized while I was poking through my old footage that at no point in time have I ever talked about what this series actually means to me. So, back in the early 2000s, think 2003, 2004, I came across a copy of Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time Master Quest Combined Pack for the Nintendo GameCube. And this game became a staple in my household. In fact, to be as abundantly, blatantly open-minded and whatnot about this, my brother and I played this game every day. It was something that we looked at with awe, with reverence, with the idea that we could beat the game. But what other secrets does Hyrule have? Is there more to the Triforce? How can we access the Sacred Realm? What's going on with the different groups within Hyrule? Are the Gerudo really evil? Or are they simply tragically misunderstood? This becomes a point of contention for me. But for me and my brother, as we played this game for years upon years, we had learned much more about this game, and yet at the same time had many situations that we had never actually been able to solve, never been able to actually complete. And so, for the pair of us, we ended up playing until eventually we had found every single Skulltula, we had found every single heart piece, every single weapon, item, side quest, you name it. And there was nothing left except questions around certain things. What was the Great Gerudo Colossus actually meant to be? What did it represent? And so, for us, it became more of a curiosity, but it became comfort. An idea that when one or both of us had a rough go at it, that the other would instinctively turn on the GameCube, boot up Ocarina of Time, to hear that very somber, quiet, and melodic introduction to the game as a whole. This, to me, is part of what Zelda is, or symbolizes, what it's meant to be. It is not meant to be the most... how do I want to word this? It is not intended to give you every single answer. And if it ever did, it would be a discredit to the game itself. What it is geared toward is giving you, the player, a chance to actually view the world, to adventure, to interact, to engage in a way that very few games out there do. Now, I'm going to pick on another game, and I'm going to actually use it as a positive here. I want to look at Dark Souls. Now, Dark Souls has a habit of all of the information you need is there, but you, the player, need to piece it together and figure out what it is you're aiming for, what it is that you actually want to get out of it. And so, through the use of the various logs, various pieces of information that the game gives you, you can, eventually, get to a point where you understand the character motivations, the world as a whole, through item descriptions? It's kind of a weird setup, but I get it. So, but that's the thing. You can only truly get a full picture of what's going on in this world through interaction, through being involved with the game, through showcasing and looking at different ways to play the game and different items. And that is a strength of this game and the strength of the genre as well. Now, I talked in my Metroid videos about something called an epistolary. For those that might need a refresher, an epistolary is a written work with the mentality of the viewer gets to make their own decisions, gets to make their own or form their own opinions based on the information presented. But the information presented does not always have to be from a single point of view. Think Bram Stoker's Dracula, which is primarily shown or viewed through the lens of multiple people making newspapers, and each viewpoint having a slightly different approach to how it's written, to how everything kind of fits together. Zelda has no epistolary or is not approached in the same mentality. It is, however, one of the more unique games as far as its approach to how the world works. If you ask the people of Castletown in Ocarina of Time what the beginning of the end of Hyrule would be, they would talk about the day that Princess Zelda had disappeared, that she had forsaken her kingdom and ran off into Wild Blue Yonder, because most people didn't have the information about what happened with Ganondorf that day. In the same breath, you could ask other characters like Sheik, or no, Sheik is Zelda. You could ask Sheik or Zelda what the beginning of the end was, and she would tell you about the day that this boy clad in the green of fields showed up in her garden. And there was a moment of clarity that there was supposed to be some grander goal, grander world, grander experience that had to come from this individual who would undoubtedly save Hyrule in some capacity, for she has had a dream of the future. And to some, this would come across as questionable at best, and to others, this is just a foregone conclusion. Of course Zelda would know what's going on in her kingdom through prophetic dreams. But the thing is that each group had their own issues, their own stories to tell. The Gorons had an issue with the mine being blocked off because of the Dodongos resurging in incredible numbers. They had an issue with Volvagia, the ancient dragon, and it trying to take over all of their mountains and slowly, one by one, eat each of the Gorons. And so you get their perspective. You get the perspective of the Gerudo, who at first were on board with Ganon's plan of taking over Hyrule. But by the end of the game, by the adult timeline, most have actually forsaken Ganon, living on their own once more. These actions and goals have changed your viewpoint on the characters over the duration of the game. And it is something that I personally believe that Zelda has done a remarkable job with over the years. However, Zelda is not without flaws. Now, again, I'm going to reiterate what is said in prior games, prior stories. No game is without flaws. But what we bring to it, what we bring with us are our experiences, we bring with us our prior engagement with other games, and we bring with us a different set of eyes. Zelda has a bit of a problem where it became formulaic, where the goal became start the game, find the first dungeon, complete it, get some story, get a new upgrade, go to the next dungeon, so on and so forth. Maybe a little bit of story stuff in between, because games like A Link to the Past had a lot of that. A Link to the Past and Link's Awakening had a lot of side quests. But generally speaking, it became go to Temple 1, complete Temple, go to Temple 2, complete Temple, maybe a little bit of story stuff thrown in between, go to Temple 3. So on and so forth until end of game. Breath of the Wild opted to break the convention of what a Zelda was meant to be, what a Zelda could be. And so, barring the Great Plateau, they opted for the entire world to be available to you. The Great Plateau, being the initial area, was the size of Ocarina of Time. The goal being, oh yeah, let's show off just how much this world of Zelda has grown, has improved, how we have improved game design through every means necessary to make the world bigger and grander than it was ever seen before. And then they showed Zelda, Breath of the Wild's true breadth, by actually letting you explore the rest of it. Oh, he's a ways back there. I don't mind. Oh, never mind. I was looking at the wrong rock. Anyways. So Breath of the Wild had a lot of showcasing what was truly capable of through world design, what they were truly capable of through architecture, world design, enemy placements, through enemy designs, through the world, and intentionally challenged the convention that the world of Zelda had to be confined by dungeons and this formulaic design. Instead, they said, yeah, we'll give you a bunch of goals. Your first goal is going to be to get to Kakariko Village. Go there if you want. Maybe you want to check out the giant silhouette of the bird hanging out off to the far west. Yeah, the far west. Or maybe you'd like to check out the burning Death Mountain off to the east. The choice is yours. What lies beyond Death Mountain? What lies beyond this hillside, this mountainside? Where does this river flow to? All things, all areas connected. And it showcased that they were cognizant about more about how the game functioned than they had been in previous iterations. That they understood that the players wanted to actually experience this world in a more open-ended fashion. That every person, every individual would approach the same problems in different ways. That every player could theoretically do whatever it is that their hearts desire. This is what I truly believe is the beauty of Zelda Breath of the Wild. And somehow, in spite of all of the changes, in spite of everything that made Breath of the Wild different from its predecessors, my brother and I still look at the game as a laid-back, summertime jam, where the pair of us could get together, goof off, talk about characters, about lore, about theories, about anything. Because this world, for all the questions, for how lived in this world is, there's always more to it. There's always more to see, more to experience. And I believe, truly, that Zelda Breath of the Wild is one of, if not the greatest Zeldas that have ever come out. And this is where I might be seen with a little bit of contention. A lot of people look back at Zelda through the direction of what I would consider to be the old style Zelda. This being Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, or even A Link to the Past. These old style Zeldas that were more formulaic, in many people's eyes, is seen as the better game design. And there are benefits to an open world design, as there are benefits to a closed or more segmented design. The issue is that both sides have some merit to them. Breath of the Wild looks at Zelda through a lens of, what if you didn't have to follow a set path? What if you could go wherever you wanted to go? The choice is yours. And other games choose the role of, we want to showcase this in a storyline perspective. The more linear the game, the easier it is to funnel the player down a more linear and goal-oriented path. In the end, there is no wrong approach to game design. There are only different approaches. Something that I have recently come to terms with through looking at different games through different lenses, through talking with an individual who is a video game designer in their spare time. It is something that I personally believe it makes video games a very unique medium that every single player can appreciate in some capacity. And I think nowhere is this more apparent than looking at games like Animal Crossing, or looking at Doom Eternal, or Doom Crossing. Point being, the two games came out at the same time. They have very vastly different approaches to their design. One being high-octane action, the other being workaday, simple, everyday life. But a life in which a player feels that they can succeed, own a home, etc. And so, again, every game has merit. And it is about what the viewer can take away from it and what the designer had in mind from the get-go. That's a pretty long-winded reasoning for why I love Zelda. But I want to now kind of switch gears. I want to look at a different, I suppose, area in the Zelda lineage, the Zelda chronology. Back to Majora's Mask and Ocarina of Time. So, I've been looking at them for a while, and I realized that there is a theory on there that has more or less been confirmed over the course of several years. Back in Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, there was a theory that went on stating that there was not 3 pieces to the Triforce, but 4, believing that there was some 4th separate entity that was a god or goddess-like being. That the fierce deity may have in fact been the 4th individual, simply due to the fact that there was a hole in the Triforce which just so happened to look like the piece on the bottom of the Hylian shield would fit into. And this lasted for a while. I'd argue probably a good 10-15 years until Skyward Sword was released. When Skyward Sword released, they released the game with a new goddess. A newly spoken of goddess. One that had its name engraved in history through Lake Hylian, through just the world as a whole, had references to this being multiple times throughout its entire run, its entire world. Hylian, of course, being the fourth piece, is notable in being more than just a talking point, but the beginning of the lineage of the Hyrule royal family according to Skyward Sword. Now, I'll be clear, Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom don't exactly follow this mentality, instead going for a more open-minded approach of, yeah, Zelda has some divine power, but where she got it is a little more questionable, as Roru and Sonia, being the first king and queen of Hyrule, suggest that perhaps the lineage of Hyrule was separated by some cataclysmic event. And so, what we end up with is more of a approach to the game stating that the divinities that had disappeared were in fact not Din, Nairu, and Ferore, but instead Sonia, Minoru, and Roru being the original god, and that our dear friend Zelda may in fact perhaps be the fourth piece of the Triforce, or of the Tetraforce, that we had once seen or sought for millennia prior to it. Ultimately, it's up to interpretation, as is many things within Zelda lore, within canon. What is and is not transferable between different playthroughs and different games is all up to the player's interpretation. And again, it's something that is beautiful about this franchise. Every player is going to have their own personal view based on their experiences of the game up to that point. And it's truly a magical experience to actually experience everything these games had to offer throughout. Anywho, while we are talking about cataclysms and what brought the world to its knees, we know that in Breath of the Wild, a mechanical army in the form of the Guardians had been taken over by Calamity Ganon and used against the Hylians to bring about a new age of bloodshed, a new age of loss, of decay, of apocalypse, if you will. And it's something that Zelda has, unfortunately, become rather acquainted with over the years. In the age of Skyward Sword, we had the apocalyptic event of Demise breaking free of the demon realm and scouring the globe looking for the Triforce. You have in Minish Cap, you had the Age of Monsters being sealed away only for them to be brought back. The 7-year time skip in Ocarina of Time, from a world that flourished to a world of decay. You have in Twilight Princess the Age of Darkness, in the form of the Twilight Realm itself breaking free, or of the Twilight Realm fusing with the human realm, of the Hylian realm, and each section combining to create this new world order. You have the Great Flood of Wind Waker, the 3-day cycle of Majora's Mask. You even have the Dark World of Low Rule in the A Link to the Past and A Link Between Worlds. You have the Fall of Hyrule in Breath of the Wild. You have the resurgence of Ganon in Tears of the Kingdom. We even have the original Zelda and Zelda 2. This world is all too familiar with the mentality of apocalyptic events. This idea that the world will be in a cycle of growth and decay. And to be honest, I kind of like this mentality, this endless cycle. This is a world where a simple statement, a curse from demise, has sent the world into turmoil, into chaos, time and time and time again. And so it comes to the player's belief, its player's goals. Do they align with the world as a whole? And what can be done to prevent this nigh unstoppable event? What can be done to bring this world back to prosperity? Now, in some games, this cycle is treated in different ways. Dark Souls has the rekindling of the first flame. You have Mass Effect, which sees the resurgence of a galactic-wide apocalyptic event. And you have games like Zelda, where every generation sees the same three figures resurge. The spirit of the hero, the blood of the goddess, and the hatred of the demon. These three beings, these three entities, are forever tied to one another in a cycle with no end. Now, this cyclical nature means that you will never run out of Zelda. That eventually we will find ways to incorporate other beings into this. Maybe it's Melodus or Majora. Maybe it's the Itopia issues with the Queen of the Drablands taking over. Regardless of which entity it is, the three are eternally tied to one another. Now, I'm of the mindset, personally, that Zelda will always have somewhere to look, somewhere to approach, something new to showcase. And this is, in my opinion, one of the draws of the series. What would happen if we got a new Zelda that focused on the Twilight Realm once again, but something that tied more clearly to this different realm, this different world's view of the same issues? Maybe there is another link, maybe another dimensional rift. We don't really know. We get a glimpse of their world, of their existence through Twilight Princess, but we don't really get a chance to fully grasp what the world of the Twilight Realm looks like. We get a singular, or we get an entire timeline devoted to the era of the sea in the form of Wind Waker, Spirit Tracks, and Phantom Hourglass. But for 3 games, that was it. That was all we ever got, and that's probably all we ever will get. But the questions that remain afterwards are things that we can look at and appreciate. What does the world below the sea look like? What is it? Would it be possible for us to dry up Hyrule and have the original kingdom come back to it? We don't know. We might never know. Maybe Breath of the Wild is the original Hyrule and we just got to see the resurgence of this world through the forming of, or through the world itself drying up over a millennium. Will we ever see the Sky Island like Skyloft in a future iteration? Maybe it showed up in Twilight Princess. And so we get this all-encompassing idea that there's never a true end to this franchise. And I love it. Short, sweet, to the point. I love Zelda. And Breath of the Wild, while it is often seen as a definitive story, I argue that it is simply a chapter, a page in the book that is the history of Zelda. And whether we as players would agree with that or not comes down to each individual. Now, back when I was, a youngin' and played these games religiously, I used to form my own theories, my own belief around the timeline, and a lot of it actually ties directly into what the Hyrule Historia has specified. But something that I think doesn't get its just desserts, its true approval, is the fact that there has never been a right or wrong answer. If you could theoretically think it up, if you could find a thread that could put a game before or after another one, generally, why wouldn't you? It's not like it affects the gameplay. The story of Hyrule is one where every chapter is a different story. But the world itself has always remained, and will continue to have heroes, villains, and creatures showcasing what makes that world special. Anyways, I've rambled on for about half an hour. How are we doing? Well, first and foremost, we are in the belly of one of the shrines, and honestly, this shrine is pretty simplistic. The idea being that you need to find a way to get driftwood from one point of the shrine to another. Or does Cryonis your way around? Take your pick. Now, because of the limitations that I have placed on myself, where I cannot use weapons, shields, or bows unless absolutely necessary, I have unfortunately had to find a bit more open-minded approaches to getting from A to B. Sometimes this works great. Others, not so much. Breath of the Wild having this as an option where I don't technically need a sword to beat the game is really weird for Zelda. But to me, I think that you never really needed the Master Sword to succeed to begin with. If you look back to the original Zelda, you never actually needed to get the sword from the old man in the cave. That's just not something that ever actually needed to happen. Wait, what? Oh, I stepped on the grass. And again, interpretation is there. Watch out for the flowers, I did. But in the same vein, people have found all sorts of ways to look at Zelda in a different light. Breath of the Wild being one of the most notable examples of how this game has approached and changed over time. Now, I'm going to use a little bit of a odd approach to talking about it, in that what challenges could come out of Breath of the Wild? Well, you have the standard challenges like the 3-heart rock. You have the idea of minimal weapons. You have the realistic survival challenge where you have to eat 3 meals a day, sleep every night, as if Link were a real person. You have to defeat every threat in a zone before you approach the next one, such as you need to be able to beat every Talus, every Hinox, every enemy before you move on to the next area. You have to obtain the Master Sword, or the Master Sword challenge, where you have to collect it before you complete the Divine Beast challenges and experience different dialogue as a result. You have to collect a Richest Man in Babylon challenge, the Armor Addict challenge, Safe Journeys, Um, you have the Ancient Warrior challenge. You have Zonai Warriors, where you have to kill every Lionel in existence before a Blood Moon event. The Hyrule Knight, where you have to wipe out every Hynox. Knock off every Talus before a Blood Moon event. Avoid breaking a single pot, smashing a crate, or taking anything that does not belong to form the to Link from the residents of Hyrule. You have the survive by only eating fruits, plants, vegetables, and a non-violent approaches to every challenge. You cannot harm a horse, an insect. You must pray at every goddess statue, and whenever you are in a town, regardless of whether you have orbs to convert or not. And you must dye all of your clothing the Buddhist monk style colors such as orange or white. These challenges each are a different interpretation, a different approach to the same game. And this, I believe, is what makes modern Zelda so unique. So often we get caught in the mundanity and the consistency of one game to the next. You look at Ocarina of Time, you had the 3 tunics, the 3 shields, the 3 swords. You had 3 different styles of boots, and this was effectively the beginning of the entire inventory system that we know it as today. With all of these different, somewhat unique, but all entirely intentional ideas of how to make Link unique in each playthrough have begun and have roots in earlier games. But they're various games having different types of outlooks, different types of, I suppose, always having something new to do is what makes them so approachable and replayable. The goal of improving Hyrule's economy by always selling items of equal or greater in value than the ones you purchase from merchants and shopkeepers. You don't stop selling until you have sold something which makes a buyer exclaim with a particularly positive sound or comment. Bonus points for selling items which localities or residents particularly desire. Meat, ancient materials, fresh produce, gems, fish for the Zora, poultry for Rito, exotic wares for the Sheikah, etc. The shining white knight in armor, catching specific horses and giving it full armor set. Finding every single piece of food known to the entire world. The completionist mentality of not only getting every piece of heart, every single item you possibly can, but maxing out your inventory on every single known item, the compendium, you name it. And so you end up with a vastly different approach to every game from one game to the next, one playthrough to the next. And you end up with, ultimately, vastly different ways of approaching the world. Now, why do I look at it from this perspective of why you need to play the game from different perspectives? Why is it that I am so adamant that you need to have this all-encompassing viewpoint? Well, in truth, you don't. But I want to look at one of my other series. Now, up to this point, I've completed 2 of the 3 Metroid Primes on Hyper Mode. And to be honest, this is the first time I have ever beaten Metroid Prime on Hyper Mode at all. And the result is that I actually had a much more open-minded approach and much more... oh, what's the word? I had much more enjoyment, but also a much more fulfilling experience playing the game in this odd or slightly different way. And to explain it, I want to look at it through the lens of The Legend of Zelda. Zelda Breath of the Wild, if you played the game 100% just as it is, using every tool at your disposal, maxing out your hearts, beating every single one of the divine beasts every time you play it, you would eventually get caught in what I consider the mundane cycle. It's the mentality that the game is going to be what it is. You're going to follow the same path. You're going to look at it from the exact same lens. And while the game is going to get easier each subsequent playthrough, you're also going to end up with a much less satisfying later approach to the game. And eventually, most Zelda players will eventually attempt the coveted 3-heart run. A run where Link is far more susceptible to average enemy danger, where a single misstep is all it takes for Link to fall. This coveted 3-heart run is almost a rite of passage for a significant number of players. This idea that you could beat the game without ever collecting an extra piece of heart or getting any additional life speaks volumes to the player's skill. And this is what I personally believe to be one of the cornerstones of what a Zelda or Zelda-like game should have in some capacity. There should be the goal of one day beating the game on a harder difficulty or in a way that would be unconventional because you can. But backpedaling a little bit to Metroid Prime, there's a moment in Prime 3, or Prime 1, 2, and 3, after you've completed virtually every single goal in the game, where you have nothing left to do except hunt down the final boss. Now in Prime 1, you get the final battle against Ridley after this, but you have to collect 12 artifacts from across the entire globe. And then you have Metroid Prime 2, where you have to collect 9 artifacts, and Metroid Prime 3, where you have 7 artifacts, and so on and so forth. Each game having this artifact hunt forces the player to go back through the game and play it as a quote-unquote new game plus. But it never was. It was never intended to be. It was meant to be an approach to the game that looked at solving as many issues as you can, solving as many mysteries as you can, collecting as much gear as you can. The final lap of preparation before the penultimate challenge of the game. Breath of the Wild, in no uncertain terms, has this as its goal, but it does so in a way that is, I suppose, somewhat more open-minded. I think that's the way to go about it. It looks at it from the goal of you have to, that the game is about preparing for your final battle with Calamity Ganon, with Ganondorf in general, and it's something that regardless of whichever game in the franchise you look at, there is in some capacity this mentality of you've done the job, you've completed as much as you can, but there's always room for growth. Do you want to challenge the boss? Or do you want to step back for a little bit and see what else you can get your hands on? Breath of the Wild says, yeah, go at your pace. If your pace is, I've done the Great Plateau, bring it on, Ganon, then you're done the Great Plateau. You'll probably get your teeth kicked in a few times, but you're welcome to try. And likewise, you have Breath of the Wild's approach of you're gonna have max hearts and maybe even a decent stamina bar by the time you complete the game, assuming that you've collected as much as you can. And again, this isn't anything wrong with Breath of the Wild's game style or gameplay loop. This has to do with how the game functions and the cycles that are common within it. And again, this is good. I am one who has always been about finding ways to allow players to experience a game in whatever way, shape, or form feels best. And in a way, Zelda has always had it. I argue that some games have been a little harder to approach than others, but generally speaking, there is this overarching goal of anybody can beat a Zelda. The question isn't if, but when or how. And I think that's a beautiful statement to make about Zelda as a whole. The question isn't if, it is how. Breath of the Wild takes that and dials it up to 11, making it one of the most approachable games. It allows you to collect a large number of fairies for the players that might not have the same level of hand-eye coordination to reflect a beam of light. It has shrines across the entire globe so that the player has ample opportunity to gear up and grow, to become stronger, to become more versatile. And so, no matter where they actually started the challenge from, they will always have somewhere to reach for. Something that truly sets it apart from its companions and its rivals as well. Anywho, we are approaching what is, up to this point, the first blood moon. Now, blood moons are something that I personally struggle with. I like blood moons. I think that they are a good and admittedly somewhat convenient way of explaining away what happens in Breath of the Wild and why enemies come back. I think that's something that Zelda has needed in some capacity for decades. But blood moons also come with an inherent downside. Because they exist and happen on a regular basis, the player is effectively caught between A and B. What works for them and what works for somebody else. Unfortunately, they are delayed by being in shrines. Fortunately, they are being delayed by being in shrines. Because there's one specific shrine that had been a difficult one to get to when I had first played the game, that had the goal of beating the game, or getting to the shrine on a blood moon and standing in a specific spot in your underwear. Now, most players will recognize this particular shrine and say, oh yeah, of course that's what it is. But I want to look at this from a slightly different perspective for a second. It demands that the player shed their armor and become temporarily vulnerable in what could arguably be the most dangerous time in the entire game. Nighttime during a blood moon. I don't think should be put in uncertain terms that this game has a little bit of a sense of irony. That it allows you to go about making yourself as strong or as weak as you ever wanted to be. And again, all purposeful, all intentional. So, anyway, Now that I've gotten that bit of business out of the way, what else can I talk about? What else could be conceived as the ultimate challenge of this game? In my opinion, the ultimate challenge is not the 3-heart run. The 3-heart run is notably difficult, but not impossible. It is harder than average because of your lackluster set of armor or armor capabilities. It is difficult due to your vulnerability in combat. It is difficult because of your lack of choice of weapons. It is difficult for all number of options of potential situations. But the true most difficult option, the most difficult challenge this game has to offer, is the 3-heart completion run. Now, there are kind of 2 caveats here. You need to get everything you can get without beating the 4 divine beasts. So, that would mean approximately 100 shrines, all 900 Koroks, no armor. You need to collect all of the armor, complete the compendium, etc., etc., etc. But you have to do it while being vulnerable and while next to no options for healing. Well, minimal options for healing, and in general, just a rather cumbersome challenge. That's what I'll go with. Now, some games do this better than others, and some games do it worse. Ultimately, it is up to the player's interpretation. What I'll call the low-level or weakest link runs have been something that have shown up in gaming for decades. If you look at Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, 3-heart runs are just par for the course for most players. Similarly, you end up with runs that are, I suppose, more open-minded. Come on, let's start a fire here. There are some runs that are just a tad more awkward, different. And again, there's nothing wrong with it. The run that I personally found the hardest in my attempts of this game's world, of trying to showcase what the different worldview could be, comes in the form of actually trying to beat Skyward Sword Hero Mode run with only 3 hearts. And it came from the realization that there was no easy healing. That I couldn't just cut the grass and find a couple hearts in there. That there was actually getting injured or damaged in the run fundamentally changed how the run worked. Where every time I had to rest, I had to find a bed, a chair, or a potion. And ironically, it made approaching each area a lot more difficult because it became more of a test of, do I know the game well enough to be able to get through this challenge in a more, I suppose, more open-ended but difficult way. Anywho, this will be the final shrine of today's video. And, I'll be honest, I'm kind of concerned. With the minor tests of strength, the game had it so that they didn't really pay attention to your bombs being pulled out. This is not the case. I can no longer run away from Tall, Dark, and Terrible here indefinitely. I need to be adequately prepared at the start of the battle. This means, in no uncertain terms, that I need to be able to deal consistent damage to this beast multiple times over. I cannot do my run and gun strategy or my I'm in danger damage style that I have had used prior. They're too smart to get away with it. And so we end up with this rather unique circumstance where anything and everything I do can and will be used against me. And that is actually pretty glorious as far as video game difficulty goes. The fact that I can't just brute force my way through a problem, but I have to think and plan around what my enemy might do, where my next heal comes from. Impeccable. Easily one of the best ways to design a game. And I personally love that about Zelda Breath of the Wild's worldview. Each enemy type, as they progressively get stronger, becomes smarter about dealing with their teams. If you look at the silver Bokoblin, ow, stop that! The silver Bokos consistently aim to kick away your tools, make it so that you cannot approach your enemy in a easy or readily available fashion. You need to be able to approach them in a way that is... You need to let your opponent find a way to make themselves vulnerable first. And this is, again, fully intentional. This is what the game is designed around. But the fact that every time you get your opponent into a weak state, there is a possibility that they're going to turn your strength into a weakness is physically and categorically amazing to see. Because every single time you play the game, you will learn how to use the enemy's patterns against them. We did so with the Lizalfos in Ocarina of Time Majora's Mask. You'll do it again in Skyward Sword. You'll do it again in Twilight Princess or in the A Link to the Past. Every game has some enemies that you can take advantage of their programming and planning. So, this is what I consider to be a good combat design. Now, knowing this doesn't really help everything. If, for whatever reason, you end up in a circumstance where the world is going to fall apart around you, that you are going to die, it's not a question of if or when, there are still options, there are still plans available to make the player more, to give you more options to succeed, even in the face of adversity. This is all to say that I personally like this game. And I can't wait to showcase some other games that have had me just as enamored with their world design, as enamored with their storytelling and how the character interacts with the world. Because having a character who is defined as the pinnacle of a hero is one thing. Having a character defined as a villain is something entirely different. Anywho, if you like what you've been seeing, drop a like, think about leaving a subscribe, and maybe a comment on a game that you would like to see in the future. Maybe there's something that I've never played before that you think, wow, this guy might actually be able to appreciate this hidden gem. tell me below in the comments. I'd love to see. And think about offering further challenges. I might not get to it right away, but my goal is to keep this channel going until the day I die. So, ow. With all of that being said, I hope you all have a fantastic day, and I hope you all be good tomorrow. Until next time, have a good one.